Welcome to another episode of Earthly Headlines. Man, this is a tough one, guys. So, on September 2nd, Brazil's National Museum in Rio de Janeiro caught on fire, and it's pretty intense. Let me just show you some of the footage real quick. This comes from The Guardian, and it's not, as you can see, it's not a simple, like a small, like contained fire or anything. I mean, the main building is just rubble, pretty much. And this one hurts because, well, there's a lot of reasons, and there's some silver lining to it too, I guess. But we'll get to that later. But this video I kind of want to dedicate to why this is so important and what the actual magnitude is, how far reaching it is that something like this would happen. So they're still investigating the fire, and they don't know exactly what happened, but leading up to it, there were a lot of requests for the government to provide more funding to the museum, not just to conduct research and all that other stuff, but to actual upkeep of the building. I mean, it was a pretty dilapidated building to begin with, and it needed to be restored. If it was in the United States, it probably wouldn't be to the code here. So I'm very surprised and really dismayed that things, in the case of the museum, things were left neglected so long that the only time they took action was when it was too late, basically. And it's tragic, you know. This museum specifically was full of valued data sets that could have driven research to come, raised new scientific questions, and answered old ones. And that's what I mean by far-reaching into the future, because you never know when some bright researcher or scientist needs to go back into the database and re-examine some previously discovered things and to look at something with a different perspective. And now, because of this fire, that opportunity has been nipped in the bud. It can no longer be accomplished. And that is a huge hindrance to education and to the advent of just scientific knowledge in general. And it's not like that happens every once in a blue moon too. So Science News, one of the publications that are read by many people, including myself, once a month they have a column where they dedicate a new species discovered in museum cupboards that are not even on display. And they can figure out, for example, in the past, they've figured out what an ancient animal ate, found out a new fossil identity. So it was a fossil was mistaken for something and then later re-examined, and it was discovered to be something else. And these are all based on museum specimens. They all have a whole backlog of these things, and they have a lot. Not everything that you see in the museum is on display. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's just in the back, and it either gets rotated out, like there's a new exhibit for the season or whatever, or they just sit in the closet for 50 years or so. But beyond undiscovered species, there's a lot of environmental and ecological information as well. So here are just a few examples. I'm not going to go through everything. But museum specimens have helped researchers figure out the 1918 pandemic flu virus to see if it jumped from birds to humans, which it didn't. Otherwise, it would have been the original bird flu. It tracked the spread of West Nile virus. It figured out how the Argentine ants came into the U.S. And it revealed the shifts in the butterfly migrational ranges due to climate change, among other things too. It was a powerhouse both in research and in the collection, says Michael Heckenberger. He's an archaeologist at the University of Florida. One of the most interesting finds to me that was housed in Brazil, in this museum in Brazil, was the 11,000-year-old human skull dubbed Lucia. Her discovery was really important because it threw a monkey wrench in the peopling of America. We've talked about it before. We talked about the Bering Land Bridge and how people crossed through the ice-free corridor, and that the Clovis First model. This 11,000-year-old human skull threw a monkey wrench in that, and it raised some really important questions, like a possible migration from Easter Island and Australia up through South America first. There are all those theories and lines of questioning that were open because of that one simple discovery. One discovery can change a whole paradigm. A lot of stuff is gone now. It sucks. And then the paleontology collection of the museum, there was a catalog of the region's biodiversity going back hundreds of millions of years. They found a previously unknown ancient lizard dating to the early Cretaceous period. The museum samples put modern plants and animals in context. So back in 2016, it helped to confirm that 2 types of longhorn beetles discovered in National Park represented completely new species. So they were able to reclassify a bunch of species that they had lumped together, and they, on a closer inspection, they're like, oh wait, no, these are actually standalone one-of-a-kind species. Those are gone. Ant specimens collected in the 1800s helped researchers come up with new standards for telling 2 easily confused tropical species apart. Again, these museums serve as a huge reference point for researchers and scientists. They discovered a new species of sea slug based on a specimen originally collected in 1955. I mean, that's almost a lifetime ago. They're revisiting it after like 70, 60 years or so. If the slug hadn't been in the collection, it probably would not have been described. Scientists often revisit museum specimens collected decades or even centuries ago to pose new questions, like the one we just talked about. They were able to use a frog collection as part of a genetic study on Brazilian lineages of fungus that's ravaging amphibians around the world. They were able to document the biodiversity of the region because of the swabbing of fungal spores from the specimens. They were able to realize that they never would have predicted that their frogs would have been used to track the evolution of a deadly fungus across time. So they didn't even there are ideas that they didn't even conceive of until they just took it off chance and just were able to go back into the database because it's there for them if they didn't need it, and it was there and they did need it, and they found all these answers and these new discoveries, and who knows, maybe it got them their PhD or something like that. So right now, curators are still taking stock of what survived and what didn't. Their arachnid collections may have been completely lost. Some things have survived, like the vertebrate collections, because they were in a different building. But the future research is where the museum's losses will hit hardest, and that's true. Across science, DNA techniques continue to expand the realm of information scientists can get from plants, animals, and fossils preserved in museums, but now that they're no longer there, the DNA techniques are useless for that sort of thing, for their stock that's no longer there. Another major blow will be the loss of holotypes, or specimens used to define a genus or species. Some were one of a kind, and yeah, that's no doubt gonna hurt, because once it's gone, and within a few decades, the only thing left will be like maybe written documentation and photos, and maybe hopefully 3D images if they had gotten around to it. But even those aren't gonna. You're not going to be able to glean more information from them as if you had the real thing. When other samples don't exist, it's hard to compare the old species with new finds to determine whether you've got a new species or not. This is going to cause some taxonomic chaos, and that's right. This is a nightmare situation if you're a curator or a researcher, because where do you know, like, the whole tree is gone. Like you're gonna have to do a lot of legwork to even come close to being able to classify things in a certain species or family, to even come close to being able to do that like it was before. There's some silver lining here. One is this might bring attention to the government and other donors to provide more funding for museums. Like, you don't really know what you got till it's gone, as they say. And hopefully this is a lesson learned, and people in power, as well as people with interest in the subject, and people who just love museums in general, perhaps the importance will be realized, the real significance of these museums will be realized, and people in power will act accordingly, and maybe help funnel the resources necessary to keep these places up and running and thriving. Another silver lining is an urgency to go digital. So although I just said that digital records aren't an adequate replacement, there's still something. There's still a document. It's a way to document evidence that we have, like perishable evidence. And the way to do that is through 3D models and imaging. And you can salvage some collection data from the fires and other like natural disasters. This way you have a catalog, an inventory of what's lost and what's not. And there is an online platform that exists today called the Paleobiology Database, which provides access to digital records of specimens. The downside of this, of course, is it goes back to money, right? Funding. Digitization costs a lot of money, and it's unclear how much of the Brazilian museum's 20 million or so items had been digitized before the fire. Yeah, 20 million things in the museum. And compared to other places, that's not even the most. I mean, there are places that have like 35, 40 million items on hand. Nothing can really replace the real thing. You'll never be able to do DNA studies with a 3D model. They can be as skimpy as a location, a date, and a number of a specimen collected. That's talking about the original field notes and measurements that go along with the actual item or artifact or whatever in question, fossil. The internet is trying to help. Wikipedia has put out a call for images of the museum specimens. They're crowdsourcing digital records of the destroyed exhibit. Scientists are sending whatever specimen images they have to kind of make up that deficit. 3D modeling platform, in this case Sketchfab, is compiling records from the National Museum, and research is still not stopping. And hopefully the tragedy will spark conversation about how museums are neglected and underfunded. Yeah, that's part of the reason why I'm making this video, is just because how it's really sobering when something like this happens. Like the realization hits you that, man, we don't really know anything about the earth. I mean, a lot, but we don't know as much as we could know. These museums are so important to our understanding of this planet that we live in, the history of our species, the history of other species, how geology works on the world, how the climate changes and why it changes, and understanding even patterns on the earth that we may not even know about. So hopefully we can come together as a civilization and as a society and try to pool resources to this thing, or at the very least talk about it. Like, at least have it make headlines. I know a lot of people can't donate money. I mean, there are a lot of rich people out there who will, who have plenty of it. But what we really need to do is talk about it. And I guess this video is kind of my contribution in a way. But the restoration is going to take a long time, probably decades. According to this guy, Jose Luis Peresoli, could take up to 10 years to restore just part of the vast collections. And like I said, there are 20 million plus things there. The disaster has led to a series of recriminations amid accusations that successive governments had not sufficiently funded the museum. We talked about that earlier. Officials have said it was well known that the building was vulnerable to fire and in need of extensive repair. See, all this is a tragic part of it. This is all so avoidable. Like, if they had strict regulation, or I'm pretty sure people were imploring the government for years before this happened, and still nothing was done. The vice director of the museum said that as much as 90% of Latin America's largest collection of treasures might have been lost in the fire. 90%. Aerial photos of the main building showed only heaps of rubble and ashes in parts of the building where the roof collapsed. There were mummies in there as well, Egyptian artifacts. We already talked about skeletons of dinosaurs, objects, and documents of studies of ancient tribes of America. So there's a wealth of information here that is just now gone. What do you guys think? What other things can you guys think of make a museum so important, and why this loss is so significant to the scientific community? Let me know what you guys think. My condolences to, again, the whole community, and I hope we're gonna overcome this, and we're gonna be able to build in a positive direction because of this. But it's just sad. It's just a bummer to have this happen. I kind of feel the same way as when I wasn't alive when this happened, but when the Library of Alexandria burned down, when I heard about that, I I knew it was a tragedy even back then. I didn't even live during that time. So let me know what you guys think. Does this have the same feel as Alexandria? And I'll see you guys tomorrow. Hit me with the comments. I love responding to them.